Welcome back to RŌL Radio. On this episode, we are fortunate enough to have the Senior Supervising Instructor at Three Rivers Martial Arts Academy and second-degree black belts under Royce Gracie, Eli Knight. Eli had trained various martial arts in his early life, but once he began training and understanding BJJ, he realized that while all arts claim that you can do great things by studying them, BJJ was the one that actually just delivered for him. Listen as Eli tells his journey of traveling to seek out BJJ wherever he could, receiving his blue belt from Grand Master Helio Gracie, all the way to receiving his black belt from the one and only Royce Gracie. Along his journey, Eli developed his own philosophy on BJJ and martial arts in general. On this episode, we are lucky enough to have him share this philosophy and unique perspective with us. Here is RŌL Radio with the truly insightful Eli Knight.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we live. Gary, how are you?
Yes, sir. I'm good. With everything that's going on with technology this particular day, I'm glad we're here, and I'm glad we could get this in.
Yeah. Listen, I want to start this with a quote. And I'm getting this from the good source, but the quote says, "Since starting jiu-jitsu, I have found a vehicle to understand life around me better. To see the technique, I see a technique in everything. I strive to do everything with more technically and more efficiently. Life, sometimes unfolds in a way how we can't control them, and finding a jiu-jitsu in everything surrounding us, I think it's a very unique way to look at life. And today we have Eli Knight in the house, and that was quote directly from his website. And I love that quote because those words specifically literally kind of surround everything that we often see on the mat, but he's taking this off the mat, and he's seeking that philosophy of jiu-jitsu off the mat, outside, and every single day, every single thing that he does. What are your thoughts on this, Gary?
Well, it's something that I try and do too, is what I learn on the mat, take off of it. And I was hoping Eli could maybe expand. First, welcome. And thank you so much for doing this. And I was wondering if you could expand on that, because I also heard you say something I heard a while ago, and that it was when you started like Taekwondo, it was an outlet for you. And we always talk about how jiu-jitsu changes lives, and I think that quote sums it up pretty well. Could you expound on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. And I've forgotten that I said that, but I've said that a lot over the years. I guess that's ultimately what I think training martial arts, but specifically jiu-jitsu, has done for me, is that it's given me a way to make sense of things that maybe for me wouldn't have otherwise made sense in life. And I think that's ultimately, I think that's what everybody needs to find in their lives, whether it's training in martial arts or jiu-jitsu or quilting. I mean, whatever it can be, you need something that you can metaphorically apply to life to be able to make sense of the things that don't otherwise make sense and can make you feel very uneasy about living, So you mentioned about Taekwondo. When I first started in martial arts, that was about all that there really was around my area. This was the early 90s. And,
yeah, same here.
It was honestly right before UFC 1 when I started training martial arts, and it was a really cool outlet for me. It helped me with a lot of personal things that I was going through, and my friends, saw that I was kind of in a bad way, and so they talked me into coming and training martial arts, and it really gave me a great outlet. It did give me a good outlet to be able to focus on something else that was interesting to me and entertaining to me and challenging to me, that could kind of turn my brain off from other things for a little while. So I got very addicted to the concept of martial arts, particularly the philosophy. The Taekwondo could have been anything, right then as far as martial arts go, but it got me to start doing more research and studying, like reading since I was a kid, I was fascinated with martial arts, but I never did it. I was not a very physical kid. I never played any sports. I was not remotely athletic. I was a little art nerd. A little very a small little like scrawny kid, and very scared of a lot of physical activity. Honestly, I mean, because I wasn't naturally athletic. So this gave me something that I could physically express myself, and to realize the importance of having a form of physical expression, and along with intellectual and philosophical, emotional, like the entire like holistic approach to living that way. So, I started to read and study more about anything martial arts related, from like kung fu to I was fascinated with Aikido as a philosophy. The martial art itself, I didn't really know a lot about. I later, studied a little bit of Aikido, but the philosophy about that was beautiful to me. And then I found jiu-jitsu, and I found jiu-jitsu by a gentleman in town that I didn't realize was doing jiu-jitsu. And it's easiest just to say it was traditional jiu-jitsu, like more Japanese style, even though it had more of a Filipino influence, and that's kind of a long story. But he was not only studying that, but he was also studying in Jeet Kune Do at the time, Filipino martial arts. He was studying. He had a background in karate and taekwondo himself, and so it was interesting to find such a true like martial artist, like in the truest sense of the word, to find a martial artist that could help guide me better. And this was around now the UFC was starting to happen. We started to see things in a no rules context, and see the obsession with the efficacy of martial arts, I think, grew at that time. Because before then there was a lot of just conjecture about what's the most efficient or effective martial art, because everybody could make a case and everyone could demonstrate things in a certain controlled environment. But to really put up like that no rules kind of situation, and watch martial art versus martial art in that kind of capacity, that fascinated everyone, and especially for us guys that were doing some form of jiu-jitsu at the time. So before I go off on that tangent any longer, that's kind of like going from journey, and then kind of like how my philosophy about it was molded.
At which point was this epiphany moment where you start noticing that jiu-jitsu is what you want to focus on versus all the other things? I mean, it seems like you touched a number of different arts, and I'm sure they all had fundamental impact on who you are today. But I mean, it's clear that jiu-jitsu was the route later in your life, and that's what you do today. And you feel very strongly about it outside, on and off the mat, even outside of the academy itself, right? So at which point was the epiphany moment when you said, well, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to go?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure if I can nail it down. I could nail it down to a period, like a period of time, maybe not just an exact moment, but I think that what it is to me, and I have to, I guess, define what jiu-jitsu means to me, because jiu-jitsu can be a very broad thing. Like you get people arguing with people who have a very elementary or ignorant understanding of what anything martial arts related, that, well, that's not a jiu-jitsu technique. This technique comes from this system, and jiu-jitsu stole it, or this system over here stole this from jiu-jitsu. And that's, at the end of the day, that's kind of a wash for me. The philosophy and the training modality, and just the approach technically that jiu-jitsu takes was what spoke to me more than anything. So the epiphany came for me whenever I was like, all these other martial arts claim to have these same consistent maxims. You use your opponent's energy against him, efficiency, technique over strength, all these things. And jiu-jitsu delivered for me. Like when I could learn some things and learn about positions, learn about how to control ranges of the fight, learn how, to operate in an environment where I felt like I could keep myself safe versus somebody that's physically superior, athletically superior to me. That was way more valuable than anything else I had gotten at the time. Because I mean, you can learn great things through striking arts, but athleticism plays a bigger role in striking arts than it does in grappling arts. Now, and athleticism obviously plays a huge role in every form of hand-to-hand combat. Size definitely matters. Strength, all the attributes matter. But the biggest place where I think that you can really balance things out, level the playing field, so to speak, would be in that grappling environment, particularly ground grappling, but I think, in grappling across the board. So, and the thing about it is that you can apply a lot of those principles consistently to other ranges of the fight once you have a deep enough understanding and grasp of that environment. When you understand one range really well, especially in the grappling range, I feel like a lot of those principles can kind of apply across the board. That's how it was for me anyway. So yeah, I think that would be kind of the epiphany moment, was like, oh, okay, this is what people have been talking about. This is what other martial arts claim you'll be able to do by studying and training and mastering this art. You'll be able to do these things. Jiu-Jitsu just delivered for me.
And how old were you once that epiphany took place? I'm just trying to gauge the timeline here. How long did it take you to have that moment?
That's kind of tough. It's tougher to nail down, because what we did when I started to study, and I kind of left Taekwondo. So around the time I'm about 16 years old, I'm training in things like Jiu-Jitsu and Jeet Kune Do and Judo to some extent, and these other martial arts. And the Jiu-Jitsu, we had ground grappling, and then we had the Newaza of Judo. So a lot of the things that we saw in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and the Brazilian paradigm looked familiar. They were there. We knew the things. It was just that the approach that the Brazilians at the time had, especially the Gracie family specifically, had to training, and the emphasis that they placed on certain things really started to become more clear the more we trained. So I guess from about the time around 17 to 19 years old was I really made the full conversion over more toward Gracie style jiu-jitsu, so that was around that time.
So what kind of impact did that have on your personal life? Well, because these are the big changes. I mean, you're talking about now we're getting deeper into a foundation or a core of not only who you are, what you do, but how you train, the way how you think, how you process information, the way how you learn and study. Right, these are fundamental changes here that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think had I, discovered it just like a few years earlier, it would have had even more of an impact on my day-to-day. So the day-to-day took a little bit more, but I was obsessed with it. I was training every day to the best of my capacity. Now, it was a lot of the blind leading the blind. We had a handful of guys that, our best exposure was we would drive to this place or that place and have to travel, and then we'd get a handful of information, come back and just have to drill it and train it. So I was doing the best that I could to train like all the time. And so it became an obsession. I was obsessed with it. And that obsession kept me, I think, from, I think everybody will probably go through an obsessive point in their life. And that's it could be potentially a dangerous thing in those teenage years to go through an obsessive period of time, because like my cousin, he wound up in jail. And he was, we were very close, like all our early adult life, and took very similar paths in different regards, or in the same regard for a period of time. And, we both got into some trouble, with different things. And he really went a very different route. There was a fork in the road whenever he got arrested, and actually I got arrested, which is a whole different story, but it was around the same time. And that was a very transformative period. He kind of kept on that route, and it got progressively worse. I, didn't want to get in trouble anymore. And so I just turned all my attention basically to martial arts. And that really, I think, got me on a better path.
What made you make that turn? Because and again, now we're getting deeper and deeper, and share as much as you can or as you want, so you feel comfortable with. But it seems like two people on the same path, and then there is an event, whatever the event might be, and both of you guys making very different life decisions, right? And the end result is very different, because we're looking at 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and it's just spirals out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it was ultimately, it came down to I had an outlet. I had a passionate, an outlet in my life that I was passionate about, and he didn't necessarily have one. You know, I mean, so all other aspects of our lives were very similar. You know, we both, experienced, different hardships, that were similar, as far as family things. We both experienced, some tragedy in our lives, and, we were good friends. We were very close, and kept, and we were both kind of confidants for each other in that regard. And we both got in trouble together. And so it's a very similar trajectory, but I think the biggest thing for me was, rather than drugs or anything else, I had an outlet that was a positive thing, that was making positive changes. And it was an addiction nonetheless, but it was a positive addiction. It was something that I could put something into and get positive return back, and so it was, ultimately that outlet that made all the difference.
Yeah, I think people need that stuff in their lives, because I about the same time I started, or same age, I started Taekwondo, moved a couple years later into Kung Fu, and then took a ton of time off before I started Jiu-Jitsu. And I've noticed that just in my own life, whenever I have something positive, whether it was any of those martial arts, but now specifically Jiu-Jitsu, my personal life is just so much better. My private life is so much better because I'm occupying my free time with something positive. And it doesn't matter if I'm excelling, I'm getting smashed all the time. And back in the day, I was just getting kicked or punched all the time. But I think having that positive outlet gives you something to strive for, and it takes over in a very, very good way for you. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that you said it is a positive outlet, not because you go in and you're smashing everybody, but I think almost it could be more positive if you go in and you're getting smashed more than you're smashing, because it's like what that's the struggle. It creates a controlled area of strife, and you're overcoming something. So like operating on a philosophical or like metaphorical level, that's what I think one of the biggest benefits of training something like jiu-jitsu is. It's like you go in and someone's literally on top of you trying to strangle you, and you have to work through that problem. And so what problem is going to be more urgent than that for the rest of your day? Yeah. So that's one of the most beautiful things about it.
Yeah. The most recent story I've been telling everybody is how I escaped. It's not who I submitted or what I did. It was like, man, I was so close to going out. I really was. And all I was telling myself is, if I can get this shoulder free, I'll be okay. Got it free, reversed the situation. And then I was like, okay, I'm gassed. I'm done. I can't do anything else. But it was just about overcoming. Yeah. It wasn't about, submitting anybody or landing anything. It was about just, if I can survive this, I'm going to come out today with something positive.
Yeah.
Hey, Eli, I want to go back to the beginning of this for a little bit. Specifically, I'm referring, because you touched on something that really kind of hit me right close to the heart. Way back in the day, and 20 years for me, I do remember the days where there was minimal access to anything jiu-jitsu. It was such a baby stages, infant stages. Books didn't exist. Obviously, YouTube was absolute. There's way pre-YouTube and all the other stuff, right? But I do remember the moments where you drive out somewhere to meet somebody because they are a blue belt or a purple belt, and they trained for like 2 years more than you do. And you go through the motions, you learn something, and then you get home. And I'm curious if you had these moments too. I often got home, and then I'm like, what the hell was it? And like, it's just like, you forgot this one thing. And like, you can't go back there. You can't drive back. It's like, and it just bothered me for weeks. For weeks. It's like, what in the world was this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I remember trying to take notes. Like, some of us guys would try to take notes, and trying to take notes over a brand new foreign move, technique, series, sequence, whatever it is. In jiu-jitsu that's challenging. Like, trying to say, okay, right hand on the left leg, it's like, so the notes just kind of fell apart after a while. So yeah, but luckily there was a group of us guys, like, maybe usually 5-6 of us that would experience the same thing. So if we could remember the details between all of us to some degree, it was helpful. But yeah, I mean, when you don't have a super strong foundation in the beginning of it, that I remember driving to Evansville and, doing a private lesson there, and with a couple of us guys. And it was real early on, is maybe one of the very first exposures I ever had to any like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and it was about half guard. The guy was showing us half guard stuff. I was like, man, we didn't play half guard. Like, we didn't know if we played half guard, it was accidental. It was like we just wound up there. So, it would be, 2 years later, I kind of recalled some of this information when I had like an area to like really apply it. And so, yeah, it's funny, man. I'll remember back on some of those things and thinking how difficult the technique was or how confusing something was. And it's like, now I'm like, man, that was gold. And I just didn't have the capacity to pick it up at the time. I wish I could go back. But yeah, man, we would drive. I remember, Royce started doing a lot of seminars throughout the Midwest. Like he was good about hitting the Midwest. So, St. Louis, Memphis, Louisville, places like that. Like he would come periodically. I remember one of the very first seminars I ever went to was a megaton seminar. And I was like, I don't know if this is for me, man. Because, I told you I wasn't very athletic or anything, even after I'd been in martial arts for a couple of years. And going to one of the seminars that he did back in the day, and that was him and Alexandre Derazan. And they both came in, and Derazan was a brown belt and Megaton was a black belt. And it was in Indianapolis, maybe. And I remember going to this, and he ran it like a world's camp, man. I mean, it was like a competition training camp.
He still does. I mean,
yeah,
he's a
I've
machine.
heard he's toned down, but he is a machine, man. Like that guy is unreal. He messes things up for everybody else because it's like, you can't train that hardcore into your 50s, and it's like, well,
yeah, you can.
Megaton, he's competed in like every world ever, yeah.
And then he'll go and compete, yeah, and he doesn't care.
He's unreal. But I remember doing like, you're talking about 2 hours of just like calisthenics and exercising and drilling before we ever hit the first technique and it was like 2 6-hour days. So, I mean, seminars these days, it's like you go to a seminar, it's 2 hours, mm-hmm. and it's like you jump straight into the technique. Maybe there's a warm up, maybe there's some drilling at the end, but it's like back then it was like, man, we're gonna drill just calisthenics, like boot camp style for 2 hours, then go into some technique for a little bit, and then roll. And then he's gonna like line up his blue belt competition team and just demolish all the attendees of the seminar. It's like, cool, man. Did I sign up for the right martial art?
It was that was a rough day.
It was rough.
But you know what? Carson Gracie Senior told me a while back. This is going years ago. But he told me he used to do these camps, and we used to spar before we did technique. So we warmed up a little bit, then we sparred for an hour, and then he did a technique. And we start being curious, what was the philosophy behind this? Why in the world are you doing backwards where everybody is, And then one day I learned, he said, well, if you're exhausted, you can't think. And if you can't think, you're actually going to stop analyzing what I'm teaching you and really take it for what I'm teaching you and sponge it a little bit more. And you're going to be by far more efficient because physical aspect is no longer there. And then it hit me. I was like, that is brilliant. That is brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. And that was the lesson that I took away from that too. It's a grueling way to go about it, but it does make sense because when you're really trying to download efficiency of technique into somebody as fast as possible, I guess, as immediate as possible, you take away their ability to apply attributes. I mean, now you can't muscle out. You can't explode out of this position because there's no explosion left in your body. It's got to be 100% technique, and it's got to be all leverage.
Nice. That's the beautiful part about jiu-jitsu, right? So do you think that strength doesn't matter? It's irrelevant? Size doesn't matter? Because we've heard this before.
Sure. I think that's hyperbolic. I think that, it's silly. I think it's borderline ridiculous to say that, those things don't matter. You can't categorically say they don't matter. They absolutely matter. But for me, it's like this. This is how I describe it to people. Jiu-jitsu is about getting the return on your investment. It's a training period is about the return on your investment. So yeah, absolutely be big and strong and fast, because when your timing is off, then, in something, you did something, it failed, or you got yourself into a bad position, you got to make up for that lateness and that deficit a lot of the time through attribute. You're going to have to speed up. You're going to have to muscle a little bit because the technique wasn't there when it needed to be, but so you need those reserves. You need those things to help I think. But you just don't want to develop an over reliance on it. If you have time to train during the week and you whatever time you devote toward strength and conditioning, let's say, you get like a 1-for-1 return on your investment. So, you're training strength and conditioning, you're getting your body healthy, stronger, faster, all this. Then yeah, your time you invest in that is going to pay off. Now, when you invest time in training technique, you get a much more like exponential payoff for that. So both are important, but it's like if you really have to prioritize, then absolutely get the one that pays off more for your investment, right? I mean, so train technique way more than that, but there's no way, there's no reality where you're going to say I can sweep 150-pound dude just as easy as a 250-pound dude. Whenever they're both athletic, they both have an understanding of their physicality a little bit. Size always matters, it's just that technique is the equalizer. Technique helps level that playing field and offset the deficit that you have naturally. Because you can only be so big and so strong. I'm only going to get as big as I'm going to get, as strong as I'm going to get, and I can try to improve that. But there's genetics like that's going to cap it. Age is going to set in. Certain things are going to set in. The technique is going to stay with you. Physicality is going to leave you eventually. So and that's what I feel about it.
Do you think that maybe that statement was more targeted towards early ages of jiu-jitsu or early ages of UFC when you had two individuals facing each other, but not necessarily but only one of them knew jiu-jitsu, and then maybe that size could be easily compensated with the technique, efficiency, and so on, versus now, I feel like majority of people at least know what jiu-jitsu is. At least there's a larger group, obviously, right? But if you meet, if you compare maybe somebody who's been training for 5 years and somebody who's been training for 2 years, that physical aspect is going to start playing a significant role, right? Because the playing field is somewhat the same, right?
Yeah, and it's about the efficiency of the technique, but it's also about the familiarity as well, right? I mean, because when you get into deep waters with someone who relies strictly on their physical attributes, then that person is going to be at a deficit for someone who has been there and is experienced in those positions and experienced in those situations. So, that plays into it as well. Yeah, I think saying, things like technique conquers all and size doesn't matter and this and that, they're good marketing headlines. It's like, if I'm, not physically an athlete and I want to learn how to defend myself, protect myself against, then I want to hear the marketing of, hey, we'll show you how you can defeat this bigger, larger person with just technique. This technique, overcomes strength and everything else like that. It does overcome strength. It does overcome attribute, but it's not magic. I mean, it's always going to be harder the more attributes you give someone to apply those things. But
and you've mentioned something important just moments ago was, you get the return on your investments. And I think that's one of those interesting topics in jiu-jitsu particularly, because you do need to understand these concepts, because physicality is part of it. And whether you are a top athlete or just, hobbyist, there is a factor of breaking a sweat and getting exercise and so on, right? But there is this other factor, really comprehending these concepts in these dangerous and compromised positions. And all that takes a long time to process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say
absolutely.
From following Eli for a while, it seems like concepts are big with you. There's like no absolutes. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's like, there's no one way to, Thomas, what you're saying about slicing a cat?
Oh yeah, there's a million ways of slicing a cat.
To slice a cat. Yeah, it's not exactly
what we're going this came from. It's
just, but like I said, like, especially if you watch like your self-defense stuff, there's no absolutes. And what I love about it is, you tell people that you're probably going to get hurt. It's going to suck, but this is, and you got to think about the bigger picture. How did you come up with that?
There's something else that jiu-jitsu, like, because when I came up learning jiu-jitsu, like the way that I learned it, like that was the thing. I was talking about other maxims that other martial arts told you, but jiu-jitsu delivered. Well, when I started in jiu-jitsu, it was like, no, you're gonna get hit. It's like these other arts are like, do this and this and this. You're gonna basically be invincible. You're gonna be able to beat up 10 guys, not have a scratch on you, and it's like
hold on.
the messiness
are you referring to touchless jiu-jitsu?
Yes.
Because I am on a mission to find it.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. That'd be really helpful in times where, like schools are shut down and stuff too. But no, man, I think the messiness actually attracted me to it. It is fighting is a big messy thing. It's going to be ugly. It's, you're going to have to untangle the big jumbled up fray of the whole thing. So, you are going to get hit. And jiu-jitsu doesn't tell you, do this and you won't get hit. It tells you do this and you'll minimize the damage you're going to receive from this person hitting you or trying to hurt you. So it's about minimizing damage. So, for that reason, and, something else that you mentioned, I do make a lot of concessions that there's a lot of ways to get things done. And the way that I do a particular thing, you have a different physicality than I do. You have different life experiences. You have different abilities and inabilities than I do. So you're going to have that technique is going to have to be modified. That situation is going to have to be modified to fit you a little bit. Now, I think that jiu-jitsu gives a great framework for most every kind of condition, every kind of situation, but there's lots of variables that have to be taken into account. So it doesn't really behoove anybody to look at someone doing something and say they're doing it wrong. I'm really careful about telling somebody that they're doing something wrong. Now, if it's something that's just egregious, then that's a different story. You're just doing it completely. You're doing it unconsciously and making these mistakes, and you don't know why you're even doing what you're doing. Then that's going to be wrong. But seeing somebody do something a little different than this person over here, well, it's like maybe that fits their abilities or inabilities a little better. So, but I think that's where a qualified, competent coach or instructor or teacher, somebody who can help guide you and help you to modify those things rather than you just haphazardly modifying things because, you have a perceived ability or inability. Because how many times do you have a student who's like, I can't do it that way? It's like, well, you can't do it that way because you don't understand the move well enough and you're doing it incorrectly, so let me help you. Then if it's truly a fact that, you can't move this way because of something else, then we'll work on how we can get you to do something similar for this situation so you have an answer for it. Yeah.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, is what you're saying is that at times students focus on maybe the individual steps, or they focus on the very narrow objective versus understanding the bigger concept, how this system or set of movements work. Because once you understand the bigger picture, you can modify the smaller milestones and adjust them to your body, to your brain, the way how you think, the way how you process information, and then obviously to your partner who has a significant impact on what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. And I remember that it kind of popped into my head, and this was a bit of my own thing that I kind of thought to myself, and I don't think that it's really easy to argue, but what the Gracie family did for jiu-jitsu, and we can talk about what other influences were around, and who else had a hand in evolving and who had more of an impact and all that. I don't want to get into like a political discussion about the origins of jiu-jitsu or the route that it came through Brazil and all that stuff. But I think that if we're going to really look at the patriarchs of the Gracie family, and in particular Grand Master Helio, I think what he did, the beautiful thing wasn't that he modified anything; it was that he made it modifiable. And I think that's an important distinction, because if he just modified it, then that would mean that he came up with a better way to do everything, and now everyone needs to do it his better way. But what I feel like he actually did was because he took the jiu-jitsu that he learned and that he trained, and he saw how to get to the fundamental essence of the technique. And because he emphasized the fundamental essence of the technique, I feel like he made it to where it could be modifiable. So, somebody with his size and stature, or someone with a very significantly different size and stature, could do the same move, and still keep the essence of it and the efficacy of it, even if it were to be, drastically modified. And it doesn't, I don't think that violates the purity of the technique. I think that it just makes it, I think it actually makes it better. That's what truly makes a technique better, is when it can be adapted to various people.
And there's been plenty of examples of, individuals modifying techniques to the point where it seems completely unrealistic, and yet they are so effective at it. They are so efficient at it that it is. I've seen it myself, where it's like, this shouldn't work. This doesn't make sense, and yet they are pulling it off. And you do it once, 5 times, 10 times, okay. But then if you do this efficiently every single time over an extensive period of time, it's not luck. It's there is a process behind this, and you becoming, in a sense, of master of your own art, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's something that, because every time I show a technique that tends to ostensibly it violates a principle of jiu-jitsu that you learn as a beginner. It's like you learn, don't do this, always do this, never do this, and I think, first of all, always and never are very dangerous statements, but I think that they have their place. Some people are like, well, there's, never say never and never say always. It's like, beginners need structure, so you can't tell a beginner, well, you can do it this way or that way or this way or that way. You're just giving them a card catalog they won't be able to file through in the moment when they need it. So I think it's sometimes it's okay. It's like, don't do that. Do this. Always do it this way for now. My always and my never, when I'm teaching, I tell people my always and my never have an expiration date. So it's like, it's not always going to be always. It's not always going to be never. So you learn, what's the quote? I think it's by Picasso. It says, you learn the rules as a professional so that you can break them as an artist. So it's like, when you understand the rules deeply enough, you can violate the rules because you understand what the danger inherently is in violating those rules. And you can supersede that, I guess.
So what is your approach personally to individuals who are starting jiu-jitsu? And I'm simply referring to the fact that jiu-jitsu is such a broad topic. I mean, it's not even like, I'm not really even sure if you can categorize as education. I think it might even go beyond that, simply because from time perspective, the amount of time that you have to invest into this, really to understand things, is beyond a year, 2, 5. Sometimes it goes into a life journey. What is your approach to an average student who comes into the academy and wants to learn this, and they have no idea what jiu-jitsu is?
Right. Yeah. And so you hit on it at the very end there, right? They have no idea. They don't even, oftentimes they don't even know why they're there. They have they have some, something that motivated them. Maybe it's that they want to learn how to defend themselves. Maybe they're being threatened, or maybe they found themselves in a dangerous environment. Maybe they got into a fight, or they were just concerned or curious. Maybe they just want a hobby. Maybe they did some, they went with a buddy to an MMA fight, and it's like, oh, I want to do that. So people can come in for all kinds of different reasons. And as well as I do, that oftentimes people who start for one reason don't stick around for that reason. It becomes something very different, right? So it's, I think I try to listen to them. I try to listen to their needs, their desires, that they think are the reasons that they're there. But with everybody, there are going to have to be some consistent things, because you're going to have to take into consideration who they are, what their abilities are going to be. My lesson I did earlier today, I've had several lessons. I have several lessons today, and they're very different type of lessons. I've got a kid that I'm training for a fight right now this afternoon coming up. And so that's a very different session than the 12-year-old and 11-year-old brother and sister that I had a lesson with earlier today. So it's like the 12-year-old and 11-year-old, the boy, there's the younger one, and he's like, I hope he doesn't listen to this, but he's like Bambi on ice. He's just like, he's a bunch of arms and legs and just flimsy, So, so I know with him particularly, I have to get him some structure. I have to help him understand his base and his foundation, just to get him to understand how his body works a little bit better before step one can even happen, right? So, for the most part, there's certain techniques that I'll show in the very beginning. I think almost everybody, they come in and the first actual technique I'll show them will probably be escaping mount position. It's this like, just even from a philosophical standpoint, it's like, we're going to start you in arguably one of the worst places you can find yourself in a dangerous confrontation and get you out from there. That's one of the overall approaches that jiu-jitsu does. It's like, we go from, if you can get out of this horrible place and get to a place that's not as horrible, then you've overcome something, so that's empowering, and so that from a technical approach, I'll usually do something like that. But the biggest thing is to get people to understand their body a little bit better, right?
What is the number one obstacle that students face from your perspective?
I think it varies a little bit, but I would say that lack of bodily awareness is one of the biggest ones. Understanding what they can and can't do. So they might have perceptions about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'll challenge you on this just for the sake of conversation. So, we on this earth for 20, 30, 40 years, depending on the age we come into jiu-jitsu, and you tell me we don't know how our bodies move.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can agree with that.
Listen, I know the answer. I want to put this out in the record because this is something mind blowing in my opinion, right? Being on a mat for 20 years, like I know myself that I didn't move the way how I moved 20 years ago. Like, there's no way, every day I'm going through a discovery process of learning new things, learning new movements. And it's not that I'm intentionally, I'm put in the positions where they force me to learn new ways. And my brain works, trying to discover and go through these troubleshooting moments, but I think the preconceived idea the preconceived idea in jiu-jitsu, I think, is often we have students coming into an academy for the very first time and they say, well, can you teach me this in a month? That just teach me all 300 moves. And why is it so hard to do this?
I think, we could even take it like a step below that. We could even talk about just listening to your body and communicating with your body, and this is, I think, why a lot of people will get from yoga, and jiu-jitsu is honestly just kind of like forced yoga. So and as far as the movement and as far as the positions that you wind up in. So listening to what your body tells you when you're in certain places and in certain positions. So the reason that we don't understand as much as we think we do about our body, it's how people can go with, have issues going on in their bodies. I think that people who do work like jiu-jitsu or like yoga, I think that oftentimes they're going to be inherently healthier. And this is maybe kind of a weird, difficult to substantiate, controversial kind of thing to say, but I think that they'll listen to their body and they'll pick up on things that are wrong. If something's going wrong with my body, I'm going to pick up on it sooner because I'm a little more in tune with what it's telling me, and on the flip side, I can also communicate with my body better to get it to do something. I have a friend that says your body will do almost anything you ask it to do as long as you ask it nicely. So if you try to force it to do something that doesn't have the physical capacity to do, then you're going to have some dramatically, some horrible results oftentimes. So, just getting people in tune and I think jiu-jitsu is a fantastic vehicle for that, and so is yoga. You put yourself into positions. One of the things I always make the comparison about, like inversions, like when you think about inversions in yoga, a lot of the time, anything from as simple as like down dog to a full headstand or handstand. How much of our lives do we spend, first of all, on a horizontal plane versus a vertical? We're bipedal animals that spend most of our lives walking on two legs and sitting in an upright posture. So when we get into a horizontal plane, then we don't move efficiently. We're very clumsy. So you learn how to move efficiently in a different plane or a modality, then that's already learning a lot. You're already like taking your body beyond its natural expression up to that point. Then you start to do things like in inverted positions, and I'm not saying anything crazy, but just positions that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable. And you start seeking out how to be comfortable in uncomfortable places. Then that's huge. That's hugely therapeutic. It's hugely beneficial. So all those things, for that reason, I think are one of the biggest things that people have to overcome whenever they get into any kind of body work like that.
And I was just speaking with one of the students literally last week, over the weekend, actually, about something very similar to what you're mentioning right now, these being comfortable in uncomfortable positions, and I think good example of it is, again, you touched on a few minutes ago, is being on the bottom of top control, right? Somebody sitting on top of your chest, on your stomach. For somebody who doesn't know what to do, our initial reaction is push forward, extend your arms, get them off of me, which in reality of things, if you have a deeper understanding of the position and what you really need to do, actually, you want to be as compact as possible. Hip movements, your feet are huge tools. Your hands, extending them out, it just causes a lot of, benefits for my partner, right? That's actually what it is, and a trouble for me. But it's not even efficient escaping. Forget about countering attacks and things of that nature. But what I'm going with this is what we know as humans from day-to-day operations outside of jiu-jitsu doesn't always translate in that efficient movements when we are in those compromised positions.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way to state it, I think. And that's absolutely true. And it's something that's very difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it. Right. So it's something that you just have to put them into those positions and then have to kind of explain, why this is a good idea, why this is a bad idea.
I was
just going to say, with like teaching kids in kids classes, a lot of times when they get mounted, they're just a dead fish. They don't use, the legs go straight, right? And they lay there on the mat. And I'm always telling them, you've got 4 tools to start with, right? Why aren't you using your legs? Or they're pushing with their legs, and their arms are flat, completely, like on their belly. And go back just a couple minutes ago. I think everything we're talking about, and Thomas and I do this little thing now called a takeaway, where we'll talk about this episode later. And for me right now, it's all about concepts and getting people to think outside that box and more conceptually. Putting yourself in those horrible positions, if you can think about the concept of getting out rather than the immediacy, it's going to help you out in the long run.
Well, and you'll hear too that that's a consistent piece of advice that you'll hear a lot of people say that never stops being hugely beneficial. The best competitors in the world, like from the world champions, one thing they do consistently with beginners is that they get themselves into horrible positions in training and then work from there. It's like I remember I was listening to Gary Tonin talk about Gordon Ryan a little while back on a different podcast, and he was saying if Gordon wanted to come in and just maul everybody every day, then he could do it in training. But he understands that that's not the way for progress for him. So he'll allow people to get him into these bad positions, to take his back, to get him a fully extended armbar, to get him fully into a heel hook, and he'll work out of those and see how deep of waters he can get into. And that's one consistent thing across the board that every single person can benefit at all levels. And you think about the mindset that creates as well, because you get yourself into a bad position. The more unfamiliar and more negatively you perceive that position to be, the more you're going to panic. Whenever you panic, you're not going to respond intelligently, and you're going to get yourself into worse trouble. So that's a huge lesson that you can learn on every level, at every level with jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, absolutely. You get in this bad position, anxiety kicks in, adrenaline goes up. You can't make intelligent decisions. And we are talking all about concepts. In order for you to execute a concept, you need to make decisions, right? Yeah. So it's a vicious circle, right? I mean, listen, I told this story to my students at the academy, but this was last year, I think. I ran into a swimming Olympic coach, and Eli, you already know, I talk a lot. So, and it wasn't my swimming, my son's swimming practice. And, I approached this guy and I was like, and we start talking, and I find out that he actually trained Olympians, and the whole thing. And so I was like, the smartest that I am, I was like, listen, so what's the secret for being a good swimmer, Olympic level swimmer? He looks at me, he has this smirk on his face, and he goes, get in the water. And I was like, well, thanks, genius. I literally told him that. I mean, I knew that. And he goes, no, you don't get it. Don't get in a pool, get in the water. You can't swim without water. You need to put yourself in the environment where you want to get better. He goes, if you want to be a good swimmer, you need to get in the water. That's it. That's the secret. and it hit me, and it literally the moment hit me, and I went back to the academy and I told that story to my students. Like, you want to get good at jiu-jitsu, get on the mat. Just as simple as get on the mat, watch, analyze, talk to people. What do they do? You don't have to spar for an hour and a half or 3 hours every single day. That's not what makes you good. What makes you good is studying and analyzing the situations.
Yeah, that's exactly it, man. I had this conversation Saturday. I was riding back. We did a course. I took a course from some of these guys. That the first part of it was like, more kind of hand-to-hand combatives kind of thing, and then the second part of the day was out on the gun range. And it was just a really interesting conversation about the cross section of principles that apply to both of the things, both of the different sections that we did, and it really got us into this this conversation, because I'm riding back, and it's a couple of the younger guys in the back of the truck where we were having a conversation about a certain group of people that train, and kind of their approach to it, what we felt was good and what we felt was bad. And they were talking about training for PANs, and the difference in training efficiently versus just going in and just like grinding it out for 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day, doing like 2 and 3 sessions a day. And it's like, I think there's a time and a place for that, but you also have to think about what's sustainable and what's efficient, And I tell people a lot of the time, this is slightly unrelated, but it's tangential. Whenever a new place pops up in town around here, every once in a while, a local place that insert team dramatic bloodshed, murder, death, kill over here opens up, and they're going to be the new MMA fight stable, and they're going to go in and just rule the world. And they go in, and not 6 months of training between all of them, go in and they start banging it out and beating each other up and rolling around on the ground, not knowing what they're doing. Inevitably, people get injured, people get hurt, but some people don't, and then they get themselves an amateur cage fight here. They luck out and they find somebody who actually is more ignorant than they are, that they beat, and getting that first win is maybe one of the worst things that could have happened to them, because now their bias is confirmed that they've been training properly. They did something
They're
right.
ready for UFC.
They're ready, and I mean, just skip that next amateur, just go straight in, sign me tomorrow, But I equate it to if you were to put me into, I don't know anything about cars. You put me into a car garage and you just have me disassemble and reassemble a car. After a long enough time, I'm going to learn some things. I'm going to, start to figure some things out about how that car works, about, the better ways to do things or whatever. But I would much rather train an apprentice under a master mechanic. I would much rather go in and have someone show me, this is this part of the car and this is what it's responsible for and this is how it works. So being guided and coached in that way, and learning how to do things efficiently rather than just going in and just banging your head into a wall to try to learn that hard lesson it's smarter in every single regard. And if maybe the most important regard is that it's sustainable. That hard training definitely has its place, but my teacher equated it to spokes on a wheel. And it's like you can't have a wheel that operates, that functions well with an imbalance of spokes. So if these spokes up here are your hard training, and then the other ones are more your softer training, you have to have a balance of those things for that to work properly.
That's a good analogy. I'm stealing that one.
It's great, man.
I'll give you credit for it, but I'm stealing it.
Yeah,
he's gonna butcher it too.
I'm for it, and I might butcher it, but I love it. I love it. So listen, if jiu-jitsu training is so customized, it varies from person to person to person, how in the world do you teach? I mean, how many people do you interact a day, and then how do you teach them all individual? Because that's what it seems to me like. Jiu-jitsu is very individualized activity from a comprehensive perspective. How do you do that?
I don't know. I don't know the best way, man. I mean, I think that this is the challenge with any kind of educational endeavor, right? You go into you put a classroom of 20 or 30 people, 40 people, 50 people. The bigger the group gets, the more more people are going to be left behind. More people are going to be struggling. There's going to be some that excel. There's going to be some that it's a perfect environment for, and some others that could have really used more personal attention. In my opinion, and this is also based on a lot of things. I've read a lot of history books on different martial arts and everything too. And I think that the martial arts weren't meant to be, there is something definitely to the Kung Fu master up on the mountaintop that, you had to go through this trial to get to him, and he would take on one or two students. There is something to that, because martial arts, in my opinion, is something that's so, like you said, has to be so customized for it to be optimal efficiency, that it wasn't meant to be ever taught to a wide group, a huge group of people. I think this is how a lot of martial arts have gotten watered down over the years. Let's take karate, and I'm not saying that, there's a lot of forms of karate that are still extremely effective, efficient, that are excellent martial arts, excellent fighting system. But generally, you go into the strip mall karate dojo, and what are you going to be doing? You're going to be lining up in there with a group of like 20 other people, standing in a horse stance, throwing reverse punches, not being taught, what is this retracting hand really doing? Why am I in this particular stance? What is this supposed to mean? So the easiest way is to dumb it down to appeal to the lowest common denominator of the class, and to boil it down to its simplest technical principle. Well, what does that do for the advanced people who could retain a lot more information and process a lot more information? It leaves them out. They're stuck in that kind of modality. Now, they're going to be hopefully advanced enough to where they can get extra details out. Royce can come in and teach a very, very basic seminar, and I'll still pick up a detail from him to this day, because he's so masterful in, if not what he says and what he does with the precision of it, but it's because I've developed a lens to watch him. Whereas, so I don't know. I mean, these are all kind of my thoughts about it, but ultimately,
so why so many people don't take advantage from one-on-one training? I mean, there are some, there are some people who will focus on small groups or one-on-one private lessons and so on. But majority of the population will go into that class of 20, 30, 50, 70, 80, 100, whatever it is, even from seminar perspective. I mean, classes are one thing, but I'm thinking like a seminar. I mean, Royce comes into town. I don't know. Yeah. There will be probably 100, 200 people there. Okay. And they all probably dropped a few $100 for that couple hours.
Yeah. And I think that, people, there's going to be benefit. There's going to be benefit to any training at all, right? I mean, to some degree. But I think that, one of the things that really restricts people a lot of the time from that more personalized training, first of all, obviously it's money. I mean, an instructor that does, I do most of what I do is private lessons, and I don't charge a whole lot for my private lessons comparatively to what I've seen around the nation and everything. But it's still restrictive, because, you want to get in, you want to train multiple times a week, and that starts to add up, time constraints or something else. You got to match up your schedule, even though, private lessons can sometimes be more customizable. But I think there's also insecurity and self-consciousness goes both ways. I think that sometimes it's easier to be autonomous in a group of people. You kind of get lost in the shuffle. You're not being scrutinized as individually. Whereas if it's one-on-one, I'm sitting there and I'm seeing every flaw. I'm seeing every little intricacy. So if you screw something up, it's right there in front of my face. And I think that makes people insecure a bit. So that's the challenge of the instructor, though, I believe. The challenge of the instructor is to find. I can't tell you how many times I go in with a lesson plan for the evening. I know I want to work on this in this way. And then I get there and I see who's lining up for class. And I'm like, I'm going to have to call an audible on this, because this guy over here is not going to even be able to remotely do what I was going to show tonight, Or, it's all athletic people. And it's I can step it up a little bit tonight, or the experienced people rather than athletic. But so it's really a big challenge for the instructor to, if you're going to be a good instructor, if you're not just going to phone it in and be like, I'm just going to show this cookie cutter lesson to everybody, regardless of their ability, that's going to leave more people behind.
Do you think there is a responsibility on a student to sponge the information as much there is a responsibility on the instructor to teach?
Yeah, I believe so. I think more responsibility on the student. Maybe that's not a popular opinion, because what's the old from the Karate Kid, no such thing as bad student, only bad teacher. Like, oh, that's bullshit, man. Like, come on. There are bad students. There are bad students, and here's how you be a bad student. If you come in for 2 hours a week, and the only time you're thinking about your training is for those 2 hours that you're there, and your brain is not on that subject before or after you get there or you leave, then what are you doing? What can you possibly get good at with that kind of practice? If nothing else, at least have it on your mind. That's why I'm glad that YouTube exists. Even though there's a bunch of crap on YouTube, there's also some good stuff. It's a great resource. And like you were talking about back in the day, there was no YouTube, there was no internet for the most part. I remember having like a bootleg VHS tape of like Fabio Gurgel in Portuguese that I was trying to work alongside. But there wasn't resources. So with all the resources that we have these days, it blows me away to think that students can come in and they aren't thinking, they aren't studying or doing something outside. And I know people have busy lives, but come on, how much of your day, if you're training 6 hours a week, how much of each day that you're not training, or the days you are training but you're not there, could you be paying some attention or thinking or going over something or doing some kind of solo practice? There is a huge responsibility on the student if they truly want to progress.
Yeah, and I was looking back on my bookshelf right here because I have a few of those VHS and.
Oh man!
But I think you're hitting it right in the money right there. It's I think good instructor has a huge responsibility to motivate the students to, lead them towards where they need to go based on their skill set, body, and mind. But there is a huge responsibility on the student themselves. I mean, it doesn't take a lot, and maybe this is not going to win by this statement, this episode might not win the highest listening votes. But listen, it's like, it doesn't take a lot for 5 minutes in front of the TV while you're watching a movie or chilling to do little drill. That's 5 minutes. If you do 5 minutes every single day, imagine how good you would get in 2 months.
Oh yeah,
that's only 5 minutes.
And as an instructor, you can tell if they are or they're not.
Oh, absolutely.
I used to I teach I teach lessons. I teach kickboxing too. I teach Muay Thai, and I can tell, like, shadow box, shadow box 5 minutes, and I can tell if you're doing it or not, because I can tell when you come in again. I'm going to have you shadow box for the first few minutes of our lesson, and I'm going to look at your movement, and it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. If you're sitting in the floor watching TV or playing a video game anyway, how difficult is it for you to do a couple of shrimps, a couple of hip escapes, a couple of bridges, like just that, it can pay off dividends. So there is responsibility, but I think that also has to be reinforced because people may just not think about it. So that is the onus is on the instructor to a degree to, impress upon them the importance of doing that solo training as well.
Before we wrap this up, do you think there is the reason why this is happening, because way back 20 years ago when you and I were starting, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have books, we didn't have any of this. We had to seek it out. You had to be hungry enough or you would fall behind, you would quit. And now we have all these amazing things like YouTube and, online services, and everything is everywhere. It's at our fingertips, that maybe we don't feel the need and the drive to do this because I can just look it up. We just don't.
Right. Yeah, it is. And so it's, it's kind of like when your parents are like, you don't know how good you have it. I used to walk uphill both ways to school in the snow, and you kids these days, it's that kind of thing. That's how I feel when I tell people, because I was hungry for more back then. It was always on my mind. Like I said, I became obsessed with it, and I don't know if I had such immediate resources, if that hunger would have been as pervasive. So I try to be sympathetic, in that regard, but at the same time, I do feel like that kind of curmudgeon old man telling, you kids, you don't know how good you have it these days, that you can just go and look up how to do a go-go plata on YouTube right now, on your phone. You don't even have to go home. So it is, I think it's kind of like what is it, like Hicks law or something like that, where when you have too many things to choose from, you'll choose nothing, so it's almost like that. When you have so many resources, it's overwhelming. They're always there, so you don't have to,
There's no immediacy anymore.
Yeah, exactly. No immediacy. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, Eli, we've been at this for over an hour. One of the things that we do, that's the part behind these podcasts, that these conversations, when it's you have a lot of fun and good conversations, just flies.
Oh, yeah.
The one of the things that we do at the end of each episode is Gary has 5 questions for you. We didn't tell you this. This is a surprise. We're gonna kind of sort of put you on a spot, but they are interesting questions. Try to answer them as quickly, and the kind of first thing that comes to your mind. Interesting things come out of this. If you don't mind, that is.
Not at all. I enjoy that kind of stuff. I may go off on a tangent, but I'll try to keep it concise.
Well, we're here for as long as you are, so that's no problem. All right. So the first one is always, what was it like the first time you stepped on the mat?
First time I stepped on the mat. Let's see. I guess we'll keep this to a jiu-jitsu context, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, it was enthralling. I wasn't in an environment where people could immediately like smash me, in the beginning. We were all a little bit fumbling around and a little lost, I mean, I have a bunch of firsts, but one of the firsts of like getting on the mat, getting into ground positioning and everything, and looking at how some of these ground positions work, it was amazing to me. Like I'm to this day, one of the most fascinating things to me is the leverage of jiu-jitsu, about how I can put myself in a position, I can put my partner or my opponent in a position that's just debilitating. It's just like, it's so controlling. It's so protective on the other sense of it. That was just absolutely fascinating to me. I was like a kid it's like the first day of Christmas, learning that something like this existed that I had no idea, so I would say probably that, first time that I really got with someone who was just really had a handle on jiu-jitsu that I didn't, then that was somewhere between fascinating and nightmarish. It's like, how many levels are there to this game? So it is intriguing to think like, man, this is infinite. This goes on forever.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. Most rewarding achievement.
Most rewarding achievement. You think it would be my black belt, but I'm not sure, man. I feel like that's tough. I think probably, oh man, that's a tough one. For some reason, that's a really tough one, because I've won some things, competitively, and I've learned some things. I've been able to experience some things with people. I think probably getting my blue belt, because technically speaking, my blue belt came from Grand Master Helio, and it was me and a handful of my friends, and it was at the end of a camp that we had done, and those of us that were selected to get our blue belts, like that was it was so rewarding in that regard, because I felt like that was really a stamp of approval.
Wait a minute. You got blue belt from Helio Gracie, and we missed that story.
Yeah, it was.
Now we got to bring you back, because I want to hear just that. Like, I don't care about anything else.
Well, there's so much we didn't touch on today that hopefully, if you enjoyed yourself, we can have you back again.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a great conversation, but yeah, I think that instance was because there was a lot of people there. There were a lot of people that. And I mean, there were guys that now they're like 6th, 7th degree black belts there that were like, 3-stripe purples at the time. It's like seeing some of these guys and thinking, man, I'm nothing, like I know nothing when I'm here. But then, going through and it wasn't even just about getting the blue belt from Helio Gracie. Like, that was amazing, but the experience itself was so transformative at that time, seeing that, I really got like an understanding for, not a complete understanding, but I really got an instance of how deep and infinite the jiu-jitsu journey can be at them.
Wonderful. All right. Number 3, have you ever wanted to quit?
Yes. Yeah. Well, maybe I shouldn't answer that so quickly that I wanted to quit. There have been times that it felt more like a job. Like that, there were times that like I was not progressing. And in fact, I felt like I was regressing, and so this is why I feel, confident to talk to people who reach plateaus or feel like they're sliding back about, reaching stumbling points. But yeah, there were definitely times that like I was like, I just gotta go make myself do this, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You go in with that mentality of like, oh God, I'm gonna get smashed. I know that this person's gonna be there. They're gonna want to roll. They're gonna kick my ass, and this is just gonna be. And you go in with that kind of attitude, and yeah, guess what? You're exactly right. It's gonna go exactly like that. So and it was at different times in my life where I wasn't able to train to the degree that I wanted to. Maybe my schedule got in the way, my personal things got in the way. So yeah, there were definitely times that I wanted to, but at the same time, no matter how much I may have wanted to, there was never I never gave myself that option. I was like, well, get over it because you can't. You can't quit. I quit a lot of things, and my parents, not to say anything negative about them, but they allowed me to quit a lot of things growing up. Sports or activities or clubs or whatever, they allowed me to quit. And jiu-jitsu was one of the first things that I ever got myself into that I was like, boy, I'm tired of quitting. Like the quitting feels like shit. Like you always regret it. I haven't ever had an experience where I quit something and it felt really good about that decision later, so I just never gave myself the option.
Sweet. All right. Describe your feelings. We already talked about your blue belt, but describe your feelings when you received your black belt.
It was first of all like undeserving, like I still have plenty of times now. I'm like a second degree now, and I'm still like, oh damn, like, am I really a black belt? Sometimes I feel like it. Sometimes I feel like I have a good enough understanding. I can convey information. I can perform. I've met the metrics necessary to be a black belt, I feel like. But other times, man, it's like, oh damn, what does a black belt really even mean? So I was surprised to a degree, but I've been surprised with every rank. Hoist was never like, I've gotten all my rank except for, obviously my blue belt, which Hoist was there. So it's like everything that I've ever gotten came from Hoist, and it was always a surprise. Usually it was like, an afterthought kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, you like put a purple belt. And it's like just very unceremonious, and there's no pomp and circumstance to it. But so getting my black belt, I was a 4-stripe brown belt, and there were 6 of us, aside from me, 7 of us total, that came up for about 15 or 16 years together, and kind of like we jockeyed a little bit for rank, but we all stayed pretty consistent all together. So it was kind of a rarity for our academy, because there weren't too many places like that with that many people sticking together for that long. And we all got to that like 4-stripe brown, and Hoist came in to visit, and he put on a seminar, and we could just tell there was something very different about the seminar. A lot of it was like the emphasis that he put on the self-defense, and the way that he would kind of put us on the spot. And so it was like a really very unofficial test. So, but I mean, it didn't matter how much I expected or didn't expect it. I was just like a baby, at the end of it. So it's like, he promoted kind of in sequence and succession, like each of us. And I was just like, I was floored, it was a phenomenal day. So I was crying and everything,
Nice. Beautiful. All right. And the last one, which is the most important to me, or at least Thomas thinks that, is do you wash your belt?
So yeah, it's so funny that that's such a contentious thing, right?
Isn't it?
It is. Yeah. People have very different, I especially do nowadays, like I used to, I was of the mindset in the earlier days of like, yeah, you don't wash your belt because, you want, if it's going to fray, you want it to fray naturally. You want it to be all your sweat you ever put into it, all your work, everything like that. I don't know how I feel exactly about, colored belts washing or not washing a belt. I think it's kind of gross at a certain point, like not to, especially if you're putting a lot of sweat and everything into it and getting on some mats. I think people should probably wash their belts. With a black belt, I don't think it's a real issue. I think that, you definitely should wash your black belt because this is my opinion. because you're going to have that black belt for a long time, longer than probably any other belt, most likely. So it's like I've got 4 different belts that I alternate through, and so I'll wash them periodically, not like every time I wash my gis, but I also alternate them, so I'm never like just wearing one like super constant. I think like the old like grizzled kind of frayed looking black belt, when karate guys and stuff like that have that, it seems a little more like significant, because it's like, first of all, how the hell did your belt get like that if you do like Taekwondo and karate? I don't even have any idea how that happened, because it's hard enough. It's hard enough when your belt get your belt frayed when doing jiu-jitsu, which is constant friction and rubbing it on these surfaces. So I don't know how those guys did that. I've got some theories, but it's not as big of a badge. I don't feel like, to have that frayed, gnarled up belt in jiu-jitsu, because it's getting grinded all the time.
All right, so I'm going to put you down as a yes. So,
yes. All
right.
Long-winded.
Gary keeps a tally, yes. So
I do keep a tally. Yep. And it's on the side of yes right now. It just tipped the scales. So thank you for that. Because
I think COVID might have something a lot to do with this. But
I like to put COVID outside of this. If this conversation happened in January, I want the same answer. So thank you,
Eli. Awesome conversation. Before we wrap up for today, how can people find you? Where are you at? If people want to talk to you or find out more about you, what's the best place?
All the social media stuff. I'm Knight Jiu-Jitsu on all the social media stuff. So my last name, Knight, Knight, and then Jiu-Jitsu. So Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, especially. That's probably my biggest platform, just because of videos. I've got a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Knight Jiu-Jitsu. If people want to get exclusive content and support me and stuff, so that I can keep on doing this stuff. And then, those are the ways to really contact me through. Usually I try to respond to all my direct messages as best I can, for the most part. I can't always, but through Facebook and Instagram especially. Other than that, those are the ways to contact me and to see the stuff that I put out. I've also got like instructionals out. I've got the Jiu-Jitsu Deep Dive instructional, and I've got some instructionals from BJJ Fanatics, which I'm about to go back and film some more stuff with them coming up pretty soon. So.
Great. Very nice. Very nice. Well, go get his stuff. Support him.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. We did not get to the YouTube stuff, which I really wanted to touch on. But definitely, if you want to learn self-defense, check out Eli's stuff on YouTube, because it's amazing, and it's going to change. I think it's going to change the way you think about things. So definitely check it out.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, Eli. Take care.
Take care, man. Thank you so much. Peace.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.